What's up, amigos? Coming there, Jaime here today. I'm bringing you an updated Riptide premium deck profile. A couple of things have changed since the new Team Dragons Vanity is out now, and so let's go over it. So for the grade 3s, not much has changed except that I actually reduced the ratio from 11 grade 3s to 10 grade 3s. One of the new additions is in the grade 1 slot, which is the new Barragios, which helps us actually filter for the right grade 3 that we want and also just hit our grade 3s a little more consistently. A couple of things to worth note. Naval Gazer is still our main guy to write on. One of the things that I wanted to verify with this is actually Fort Vessel Dragon in the new set. Fort Vessel is on place, counterblast, -5 of your opponent's Vanguard, and so I was like, wow, that's actually pretty good. And just to reiterate with Naval Gazer's skill is that basically in the third battle or more, when he attacks, you can counterblast, restand something, and he gets 10k. And so one of them is an act while the other one's an on place, and so it just made more sense to actually have Fort Vessel in a premium deck because you would just ride, do the skill, and actually stride, and so you get the benefit of the -5k on a Lambros turn with a Riptide play kind of thing, right? And any other play that you want to follow up with Veleos or even Alexandros. But just really thinking about it, the counterblast on the -5k isn't as worth it as I thought. Usually you want to save your counterblast for restanding the Riptide. Riptide is basically 4th battle or more, gets 20k, so he's a beater. He's 32k by himself, and you abuse him with units like the starter Andre and the grade 1 Orphea just to restand, and of course your Vanguard, which would be Lambros on the first turn. And so one of the things is that your counterblasts are worth more on restanding Riptide than just minusing 5 on the opponent. And part of it is just like, wait, how does that even make sense? Because if you -5k your opponent and you have more attacks, wouldn't that just take more cards out of the hand? Yes, it does. But Riptide is also already ripping cards out of your opponent's hand. In fact, if they don't have a PG or a heal, you're usually ripping 2 or 3 cards from the hand, especially if you got triggers from the Vanguard that turn as well. And one of the things that Fort Vessel, if you have to ride grade 3 for the first time and your opponent's at grade 2, you could reduce them to a very low number, so they could be from a 9k Vanguard to a 4k Vanguard, for example, and that's some value as well. However, just the pressure from a Naval Gazer turn with a Riptide, and your opponent's at grade 2 and you're grade 3 with an Excel circle, just actually yields more pressure in that point. Because really, the -5k doesn't matter with the Riptide if he's so big, right? And you just restand Riptide with Naval Gazer at that point. And so with that, even Zay from the Discord and Reddit made me realize, like, honestly, like, Fort Vessel is not really worth it if you really think about it. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. And so trying it out, I realized that I actually missed Naval Gazer. And so that's why we still have Naval Gazer. I know people have thought, like, dude, run Fort Vessel, you know? And I wanted to make a valid argument and some of my experiences that I noticed and also basically the logic behind it as well. And so I hope I did enough justice about it. If not, then I could always just talk in the comments below. So go from there. But obviously the deck focuses on the Riptide as well. Like I say, you want to stand Riptide as much as possible in your battle phase and potentially end your opponent on your grade 3 turn, right? Or on your first stride, and if not, you can do it by second or third stride, just with regular Aquaforce stuff. So really powerful. Honestly, it's probably one of the most competitive builds that are legit. There's another build that I'm thinking of, but I have not tested yet, and so I will leave that to another video. But pretty much Riptide Premium is a good candidate for taking to an event, so potentially get into top 8 and that kind of thing. So nobody's gonna really expect it. It's a low-key deck at the moment, but yeah. And again, thanks to Wave Nation and Zay for building this in the first place. And so with the next grade 3, honestly, this could be your tech grade 3. I stuck with a Hydro Hurricane Dragon because he's on place, Counterblast, retire something on your opponent. So you could actually choose to kill something on your opponent's turn. And this can be some annoying boosters in the grade 1 slot. I mentioned before, like, for example, you got Brownie Jerk and the Centipede unit in Mega Calling, for example. You got other cards that matter. And you got also annoying grade 2s that you can get rid of easily. So you don't have to use his skill. If you do on place, you could just call him down as a 12k beater. But it's there for you available. And thanks to Barragios, you can actually search for it if possible. So it is a little more easier to come by. So I was able to reduce the grade 3s to 10 instead of the 11. So I haven't had problems with striding. And honestly, this is nice, especially since most of these grade 3s are actually also useful in the rearguard circle. So they don't just linger in your hand and be useless shield. They actually do something. So yeah, let's move on to the next lineup. I'm actually going to go from 0, 1, 2. I think it makes a little more sense just keeping in mind with the grade 3s, and the lineup would just make more sense that way. Now into the grade zeros. So our starter is actually Andre. He is the starter from the Davos Trial deck back in the days. Part of the reason is because he's able to give a Magnum Assault skill, where basically you can Counter Blast, put into Soul, choose one of your units, give the skill, red text. Basically, at the end of the battle, that this unit attack Vanguard, you can restand it and it gets plus 2k for the rest of the turn. So you want to do this on Riptide ideally. You can do this on a Coral Assault, for example, anything that you want to restand. Even one of my friends, Ross, when he was playing this deck against me just to get a different perspective, he actually used this on a Tidal Assault with an Alexandro's turn, and Tidal Assault by himself did 4 attacks, and because you did Tidal skill in the first one to get this, the restand there, and then Alexandros restood, and then Andre restood with a couple triggers on a Tidal. So you could do a multiple plays with Andre is what I'm saying, but ideally you want Riptide and Coral Assault, but mostly Riptide, so you can get the maximum benefit for that Counter Blast essentially. So for the triggers, it's 8 crit, 4 draw, and 4 heal. And for the draws, we have the PG draws. We want to make sure we have room for the grade 1s. There's very tight space in the grade 1s, and I'll show that too. 8 crits for that pressure. Especially play the premium crit collection. That way you can have the soul for Orphea and other units. Even Tidal Assault V takes some soul. So just having the soul to make sure you can do your plays are key. I think there was one time I wasn't as conscientious on my soul, and I wanted to do a double Orphea play. I explained in my previous video that you can do double Orphea on a Riptide with a Wheel Assault, switching places the 2 Orpheas. However, I was short on 1 soul. And so this crit actually does come in play. I don't feel like you need to play the old Supersonic Sailor just for the soul part and the counter charge. V crits V triggers in general are very appreciative because the 10k power up is much more valuable than just the 5k difference to get some utility out of it, especially if you're restanding Riptide a couple times during that turn. You just get much more value from that massive power up of a 10k power trigger, right? And so, yeah, let's go into the grade 1s. Onto the grade 1s. This is where I'm really excited about. We got the new edition of the Barraggio's Retrain in the set, and boy, he's a really good guy. So for those that don't know, Barraggio's has 2 skills, both Vanguard and Rearguard skills. The first one is basically, if you have 4 more arrested Rearguards, he gets plus 5k. It's a continuous skill. So it works when he attacks and he counts himself, so he can count himself for that boost. Makes it easier to accomplish. So he could be a 13k attacker or even a booster, which can come in play. So the second skill is auto. When he's placed on Vanguard or Rearguard, you can check the top 5 for a grade 3. If you do, add it to your hand and discard a card, which is phenomenal. So you can get your Riptides, the Naval Geyser, so you ride properly, and even if you need the Hydro Hurricane Dragon to retire some annoying pestering unit. And one of the things that I really like Barraggio's is that he's always good. Like, you want to see him on your first grade 1 turn, because you can either ride the Wheel Assault or you can ride the Barraggio's or even the Nicola. So all these cards are really good as ride targets, but Barraggio's is also good on the Rearguard cycle in the early game, so you can get the right grade 3s, do some filtering as well, and then even in the mid game where you can still filter. And sometimes you don't even have the Riptide on your stride turn. Like if you stride into Lambros and you're missing the Riptide, but you have the Orphea, you have the Andre and all that stuff, the Counterblast. I've literally called this guy and I've hit the Riptide, and I just grab it and discard a useless card that I didn't, and that would just make the turn. It's ridiculous. The fact that we can search Riptide on demand almost just gives this deck more kill potential, and it's really powerful. And so that's why I opt to the 4 Barraggios. Out of the great ones, you can see there's 3s and 2s, but definitely Barraggios a 4 because you can just search your power card, which is Riptide. And even though if you don't have the Orphea or your Andre got killed or something, you can still use your strides to take advantage. You can still use Naval Geyser to take advantage of Riptide. And so it's worth it in the end. So with that, we also got Orphea. We have 3 copies. I didn't want her to be reduced. I didn't want her to be too clunky. So 3 is a right ratio. Like to see it by first stride or second stride. And usually 3 has been working for me. And honestly, you want to see her as a rear guard. You really don't want to ride her. One, she's 7k base. But at the same time, she doesn't do anything on Vanguard, so she just gets wasted at that point. So other cards just have better skills on Vanguard as well. And she has resist too. So if you're going against something that can kill it, you have resist where you can just don't have to play around it. For example, Nubatama has the G guard that can grab grade 1s from the back row, but can grab it, resist, right? So that's super helpful. And going to the rest of the grade ones, Wheel Assault and Nicholas. So Wheel Assault, like I said, on Vanguard, when you ride on it, you can Counterblast, draw a card, call a card. You can call the Riptide on turn 2. So when you ride up to grade 2, you can call the Riptide, you can call a Tidal Assault, and so you can do your 4 attacks and do the Riptide play. So you could already put pressure on that. So that's still available to you, but it's not as like the play, for example, right? And so the other skills, the Regard Circle, were basically at the end of battle, it boosted, you could swap units. And that's where you can do the double Orphea play. I mentioned in the previous Riptide deck profile that at the very end, I showed like a Riptide or double Orphea play. And so you can go back to that video at the end and actually see that combo play. It doesn't come up as often, but when it does, you're pretty much going to put the nail in the coffin, basically. Especially if Riptide's going to be so big with triggers, and if you're on an Alexandros turn, that's actually going to beef it up too at that point. So it's overkill almost at that point. But honestly, Wheel Assault's a really great unit, so I still want to play him at 3 at least. Also a good unit to ride, like I said. Just have that skill available to you to plus and actually put some pressure on turn 2. Nicholas was the remaining slot. Honestly, there's a lot of other grade 1s that you can actually fight over for this spot. But with the Barraggio's filtering, I realized that the filtering itself is very beneficial because you deck in your deck out, right? And what I mean by that, you take out non-triggers out of your deck, grab the combo pieces that you need to do that turn. And as a result, your drive checks become a lot more scarier. And so your opponent has a compelling feeling to actually guard extra when the Vanguard attacks. Because most of the time when you attack with the Vanguard in Aquaforce, you're 9 times out of 10 going to put the triggers on your rear guards anyway. So they're like, I'm going to guard for make it like a 2 or 3 pass. But now it's just like they have this crit pressure, or they just take it and they're like, I don't know if I want to take this because if you get a crit, you put me out of the game already. You don't even have to put the triggers on the rear guard if the Vanguard can do that. And so it's just one of those things that I kept in mind. And so Nicholas just helps with filtering because I do play Algos in the grade 2 lineup. And so grabbing Algos is a soft +1. So if you hit it, you +1. If you don't, you just don't hit. He's an 11k, so it might matter in the early game where he can poke by himself. There are plays that you can actually poke, and if you have Algos as the Vanguard, you can restand this and still hit with another 11k poke. So you can really use that play if you want to. I don't do that too often because I don't want to use the Counterblast early on. And I'll explain why in a bit, actually. But Nicholas is very welcome. He's another card that could filter, get our combo pieces, decked in our deck out so our drive checks become more deadly, and we can stack those triggers on Riptide. On to the grade 2. So we are playing the 11 lineup, and essentially we're playing the 4 Tidal V, we're playing the 4 Coral Assault, and the 3 Algos. The V Tidal, because basically when it attacks, you can Soul Blast 1, restand it, and if it's the first one, it doesn't lose 5k. So you essentially want to use Tidal Assault as an attack enabler. And so what I mean by that is that basically on a grade 3 turn, let's say you have Naval Gazer, and then you have the Tidal Assault on the Excel circle. And then, of course, if you have Riptide and some other unit in the other column, so let's say, for example, maybe this kind of ratio. There we go, so you guys can see. Essentially, Tidal will be the first and the second wave. And then your other unit, it doesn't have to be an Algos, it could be a grade 3 or something, just to poke, just to get you to the third battle. And at this point, Riptide can actually attack, then Naval Gazer, restand, and you got, boom, another Riptide attack. And so really, Tidal is helping in that regard, where he can be basically getting you to that number of battles. So that way you could actually abuse their card, such as Riptide, even Coral Assault. So with Coral Assault, essentially, basically, when it attacks, if there are 4 other units that are rested, it counts the Vanguard. He gets plus 15k, and at the end of the turn, if there were 4 more waves, he can go into Soul and draw you a card. So very key card, helps you keep maintaining advantage too if you don't finish the turn. He's also a powerhouse card to do some damage. You can abuse it with Andre, you can abuse it with Orphea like I mentioned before. Stack triggers on him, just restand, keep using that 15k power up to abuse. Honestly, he's a very good card. Also, on your grade 2 turn, if you have a Tidal and this, and you really want to dig for different combo pieces for your next turn, you can ride something like Algos, call a Tidal, call a Coral Assault, do the Tidal 2 battles, then your Vanguard, and then your Coral Assault, and you get your 4 battles. And if you have your grade 1s, you can potentially make a beefy board that early on, and you're dishing out really good damage. And with that, you can actually just do some pressure, and at the same time, this will go into Soul, and actually draw you a card from deck. So you're able to fetch for pieces a little more quicker, dig deeper into your deck. So you can use it for that utility as well. But also in the mid to late game, he's very useful to be a beater and also maintain advantage as well. And so with the algos, I'm playing at 3. I didn't want to maximize too much on algos, but he is there. One, because of the Nicola search, so I could filter him. Algos is basically another Tidal Assault in the same purpose. Like I said, you want the first and second wave to be a restander like Tidal or even Algos in this case. The one difference is that Tidal V is a soul and Algos is a counterblast. And that's very important to note because you ideally want to use Tidal Assault early on or on your grade 3 turn. So really you just work with 1 or 2 counterblasts on your Naval Gazer turn because think about it. If you ride to grade 3 first and your opponent's at grade 2, Naval Gazer is the one that's going to use the counterblast mainly. And so if you can save that on a Riptide, then that's great. And so just be conscientious of that. Sometimes you may not have a damage. Sometimes you may heal and that kind of thing. And so if you use the Tidal over Algos, that helps with that flexibility. Or maybe you just have 2 counterblasts and you really need the second counterblast because you only have an Algos that turn. And you can still use the Algos and then follow up with Naval Gazer skill, essentially. And the same thing on your stride turns, right? You rather save your counterblast for Orphea, for Andre, and any other units. So if you do a Lambros turn and you use 1 Orphea and 1 Andre, that's actually 2 counterblasts. So you can work with the turn with 2 counterblasts. If you needed the Algos to go off, then you needed a third at that point. And so just be conscious of that. Tidal is usually the best one to go to. That's why he's at 4 while August is at 3. So I hope that makes a little more sense going up the grades just to cover that. And onto the strides. Onto the strides. So we are playing the 4 Lambros. For those that don't know about Lambroke, I know he's a little old, but essentially when he attacks and it's the 4th battle or more, you can actually Persona Flip, choose 2 of your units, stand them up, and then if you have 2 face-up cards in the G zone, give them plus 10k. So the restand ability is actually available on first stride. It's just that if you restand weak units, you really don't get much out of it. But if you're restanding a Riptide, heck yeah. That's really the gist of Lambros. And then, of course, later on, if you're GB2, basically, you get the plus 10k, so even better. And so it's basically Alexandros if you were GB2 already, and you still get that benefit. And so Alexandros is basically the Counterblast version. Second or third wave, you can, at the end of the battle, Counterblast 1, choose 2 of your units, stand them, and they get plus 5k for each of your units face up in this G zone. So he stacks over time. I play 2 because most of the time you go into Lambros anyway, so you really don't need the third one. And then in the very late game, he gets really big, and so he probably just becomes the more worth unit. And if you don't have the Orpheas anymore and you've already used your Andre, he's still your saving grace to restand Riptide outside of Lambros. And he's just a massive power-up as well, so just get benefits, right? Exactly. Following that with that is Valeos, the Stride. So when he attacks Counterblast 1, call up to 2 cards for every face-up card in your G zone. And if you if you have 2 or more face-up cards as a result in the G zone, then you can lock your opponent at 11k mark, and then for each unit you called already, you can draw a card. So the 11k lock is locked behind the 2 face-up cards, but the regular skill, call 2 units for every face-up, you draw a card for each of those. So it helps you maintain advantage, and honestly, it can come up in certain matchups. A good matchup is actually the Nubatama matchup when they're playing like Jamio Kongo and Hanzo, so you really don't know where they're going to go with. So at that point, you might as well build a field and have a decent sized hand. So if they even hit your hand, you still have a field to work with. Or the other way around, if they hit your field with a Hanzo or a Drachma or some other Gilga, for example, you still have a hand that you can survive and kind of come back with another Valeos or with another Lambros, whatever it may be. So it's very useful in those matchups. Otherwise, you can abuse the 11k mark. If your opponents are very low damage, you can start poke, poke, poke. Each card becomes a damage or something to draw guard because triggers don't affect you or your opponent technically. And so take advantage of that. So Valeos has a place in this deck, so he's very good. Megiddo and Sabris. So Megiddo obviously becomes a little more relevant today because we have Riptide, so you can call a bunch of Riptides from hand or drop. You can even call units like Coral Assaults and Algos and all that Tidal Assault. So they all get benefit from the on-call +5, and they all swap columns, so you can get actual value from the Megiddo turn. And it's not just like, Grand Blue with Night Storm and 4 Skull Dragons, basically. So Megiddo has a place in this deck and is actually potentially a kill turn depending on your setup. And at the same time, if those don't know, if you get Drachma and you have to write a grade 2 or a grade 1, if you have another copy in your hand and you're basically GB3 already, you can ultimate stride on grade 1 and grade 2 if you're already past that point, essentially. So this is after you get Drachma, essentially, and you had to ride not a grade 3. So just keep in mind that, so that play is available. Again, Nubatama running around. maybe some of the other fire clans like Kagero for essentially and Arakami now, especially since they got new support. So just be on the lookout for that. And it's like, oh, I do have that play. So if I do this, I can come back and win. Sabreeze too, because honestly, the only thing that I really use Counterblast are your Algos, your Orphea, and your Andre, and your Naval Gazer, basically. But if you actually Sabreeze on that turn, then you don't use Naval Gazer and you have Orphea and Andre to go off, but you can still get the restands on Riptide if you have enough Counterblast, for example. So if you're playing the early games, let's say both of you are in grade 2 for a while, Aqua Force can actually fight in the grade 2 game pretty well. And so you can stay alive, and then it's like, all right, I got the Riptide, I'm really go off, bro. But if you're going to stay in grade 2, I'm going to Sabreeze you, essentially. If not, then later in the game, you just flip that card with Alexandros or with Valeos. Doesn't matter. So just having that available to you is actually key. And so let's go into the G guards. Onto the G guards. So we are playing 2 Ionis, 2 Gaphelia, 1 of Ice Barrier, and 1 of Dismal. And so Ionis is the G flip guard. So he's GB1. So when you put it on Guardian Circle by G Guardian, essentially, Counterblast 1, flip a copy of something, usually Gaphelia. Or a Sabreeze. Actually, yeah, it has to be Gaphelia because of G guards. Derp. It gets 5k for every unit on the board, and those units get resist and cannot die to the hit of the battle. So if somebody attacks your unit, it won't die. It's kind of like a Dismal effect. And basically, you can get really big because you are committing somewhat of a board. And so Ionis becomes a little more relevant. And at the same time, if you're using strides like Valeos over here, he builds a field for you. And so Ionis becomes more key in that respect too. And also you want to make sure that you flip the Gaphelia. So if you really need to countercharge next turn, you can do the countercharge and still go into a Lambros turn. Because one of the things I like about Lambros in this deck is that Lambros just needs to be GB2 basically to be used the full 10k power up. Or if you're not there, then you can just, I mean, you will. But essentially, you still get the 10k power up without using a combos, whether way you be Alexandros. Because using a Gaphelia on your turn, on an Alexandros turn, actually hurt your turn a lot. Because that minus 5k made a difference for every battle that a unit would attack after the power-up. So restanders couldn't abuse it as much. And so you can freely use that. And at the same time, with Gaphelia, if you actually Megiddo, let me pull them out right here. There's a bunch of cards over here. There he is. So if you Megiddo, you can actually counter charge with the Gaphelia because at the end of the turn, your G-Zone's going to die anyway. And so with the Gaphelia, you can make sure that you have enough counterblast for an Algos, or for other units that use Counterblast, like you can call an Orphea column and actually just abuse that column too. So just abuse the same Riptide over. It doesn't have to be multiple Riptides. It's kind of like the Skull Dragon Megiddo play where you're using different Skull Dragons, but in this sense, it's almost like you're abusing the same Skull Dragon, essentially. But anyway, outside of that, Gaphelia does have a 5k shield on the second or third wave, so it kind of fills that gap. It's not as strong. Honestly, it could be better, but ideally it's for the counter-charging ability. And it also unlocks too. So you're facing Link Joker, that's always good. Ice Barrier is the plus 10k on the first or fourth or more. So it's kind of a bigger shield without a cost, essentially, just the wave restriction. And then Dismal is there if you need to G-Guard and you haven't had GB online yet, and you want to protect your Riptide or any other unit, then that's what it's there for, essentially. And so, yeah. Again, amigos, that's the deck profile. All credit goes to Wave Nation and Zay for originating this whole build, and for me, just play testing, experiencing, updating with the new Team Dragon's Vanity support. Honestly, it's in a better place now, especially with Baragios being included. And as you can see, honestly, he's like the only new unit actually being played from the set. And of course, you know, just trying out some of the other grade 2s or grade 3s. Honestly, Baragios is the one that sticks out the most. And some of the lineup did change, the grade 1s and even the grade 3s a little bit. So hopefully this was insightful. Honestly, I like this deck. It's very fun. And if your opponent doesn't know what's coming, you just take full-on advantage. And there have been games where I've beaten opponents from 2 damage, and then you just stride into Lambros with the Riptide play, and you just put them to 2 to 6 because they weren't expecting that. And so their hand might not be prepared for that with PGs or heal triggers to G-Guard and yeah, that kind of stuff. And so, again, this is one of my favorite decks to play. It's fun. It's also competitive. And so if you guys have any questions or even more insight about the deck, feel free to comment down below. Like the video, subscribe, and share with others. So see you later, amigos. Signing out. Bye.